The rain poured relentlessly over the city that night, washing away the sounds of traffic and leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps. Inside a dim hospital corridor, a young woman sat alone on a cold metal bench, staring blankly at the papers trembling in her hands. Those papers held a choice no 24-year-old woman should ever have to make. Behind her, doctors fought to keep her father alive. In front of her, debt collectors waited like vultures. And somewhere across town, one of the most feared men in the city had just made an offer that would change her life forever. An offer that sounded less like salvation and more like a prison sentence. She had promised herself that no matter what happened, she would never marry for money, never surrender her freedom, never become someone's possession. But fate had other plans. Because within days, the girl who once dreamed of find herself standing beside a man whose name alone made powerful people tremble, and what she believed would be a temporary arrangement would become the greatest love story she never saw coming. But before that happened, before the expensive rings, before the secrets, before a ruthless mafia boss would fall hopelessly in love with the woman who never intended to stay, everything began with a girl named Elena Carter, and her life had never been easy. Elena Carter had always been the kind of woman who carried storms quietly. At 24, she worked 2 jobs, attended evening classes, and spent nearly every free hour taking care of her father, Robert. Ever since her mother passed away when Elena was 14, life had taught her one lesson over and over again. No one was coming to save anyone. So Elena learned to save herself. She learned to smile when she wanted to cry, to work when she wanted to rest, to comfort others even when her own heart was breaking. People admired her kindness, but very few understood how lonely she truly was. Deep inside, Elena carried dreams she rarely spoke about. She dreamed of opening her own bookstore cafe someday, a quiet place filled with music, coffee, and stories. She dreamed of falling in love with a man who would look at her the way her father once looked at her mother, not with wealth, not with power, but with devotion. Unfortunately, dreams didn't pay hospital bills, and dreams certainly couldn't stop the mounting debts swallowing her family whole. For months, Elena watched her father's condition worsen. The treatments became more expensive, the creditors became more aggressive, and hope slowly began slipping through her fingers. Yet she never complained, never gave up, never stopped fighting, until the day everything collapsed. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Her father suffered another heart attack. The ambulance arrived just in time, but as doctors rushed him into surgery, another blow struck. The remaining hospital expenses had to be paid immediately. Without the money, there would be no further treatment. Elena stood frozen. 20 years of sacrifice, years of sleepless nights, years of hope, and suddenly, everything depended on money she didn't have. She borrowed. She begged. She called friends. She sold jewelry. Nothing was enough. Then a stranger appeared. A man in a black suit. Polite, calm, terrifying. He handed Elena a card. "There is someone who wishes to speak with you." She frowned. "And who would that be?" The man hesitated, then quietly answered, "Mr. Alessandro Moretti." The color drained from her face. Everyone knew that name. Whispers followed it. Fear followed it. And unanswered questions followed it. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something far darker. But no one denied one thing. Alessandro Moretti always got what he wanted. Elena's first instinct was to throw away the card. But when she looked through the hospital window and saw her father fighting for his life, desperation became stronger than fear. She agreed to the meeting, not knowing she was about to walk into a world she had spent her entire life avoiding, and the man waiting for her would turn her future upside down. But even Elena couldn't imagine the truth behind his shocking proposal. The Moretti mansion looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Security guards lined the gates. Luxury cars filled the driveway, and silence hung in the air like something dangerous. Elena nearly turned around. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. But thoughts of her father pushed her forward. She entered the grand office. And there he was, Alessandro Moretti, 34 years old, powerful, feared, cold. He sat behind a desk without looking up. For several seconds, the room remained silent. Then his dark eyes finally lifted, and something unexpected happened. The feared mafia boss froze, because the woman standing before him looked nothing like he imagined. She wasn't greedy. She wasn't intimidated. And she certainly wasn't interested in impressing him. Elena stood with dignity despite the fear racing through her heart. She met his gaze directly, which almost no one dared to do. Alessandro studied her quietly, and for reasons even he didn't understand. He found himself unable to look away. But Elena wasn't admiring him. She wasn't enchanted by his wealth. She wanted answers. Why am I here? His voice remained calm. Because you need help. And what do you want in return? A strange smile crossed his face. Marriage. The room went silent. Elena blinked. Surely she had heard wrong. But she hadn't. Alessandro continued. It will be temporary. 1 year. After that, you're free. She stared in disbelief. You're asking a stranger to marry you? I'm offering you a solution. No. His expression didn't change. You haven't heard the conditions. I don't care. She stood immediately. But before reaching the door, his next words stopped her cold. I know your father needs surgery. Elena froze. And I know exactly how much it costs. Fear filled her eyes. How do you know that? Because when people matter to me, I protect them. His answer sent chills down her spine. She should have run. She should have said no. But fate can be cruel. And love sometimes begins in the most unexpected places. Little did Elena know. The man she believed she could never love was already losing a battle he never expected to fight. Because for the first time in years, Alessandro Moretti had become fascinated by someone who couldn't be bought. And soon, that fascination would turn into something far more dangerous. Something neither of them were prepared for. Love. But their journey together would first pass through betrayal, secrets, and a tragedy capable of destroying everything. And when the truth finally emerged, Elena would face the most painful choice of her life. One that would determine whether this strange marriage remained temporary or became forever. Before the truth, before the tears, and before a love neither of them had planned for, Elena Carter made the decision that haunted her for weeks. She said yes, not because she trusted Alessandro Moretti, not because she loved him, and certainly not because she wanted to become the wife of one of the most feared men in the city. She said yes because the alternative was losing her father, and that was a pain she simply could not bear. To Elena, the marriage was nothing more than an agreement. 1 year, 12 months, 365 days. Then they would walk away as strangers. At least, that was what she believed. Their wedding took place in complete secrecy. No reporters, no grand celebration, no romantic vows, only signatures, 2 rings, and 2 people who couldn't have been more different. Standing beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, Elena felt strangely empty. This wasn't the wedding she had dreamed about. Since childhood, she had imagined smiling beside the man she loved. She imagined butterflies, excitement, warmth. Instead, she stood beside a man whose expression never changed. A man surrounded by bodyguards. A man whose reputation frightened entire cities. And yet, when the ceremony ended, Alessandro quietly stepped closer. His voice was low. You look unhappy. Elena forced a smile. It's nothing. His eyes lingered on her face. No. For a moment, something softened inside him. It isn't nothing. But she simply looked away. Because allowing kindness from him felt dangerous. Kindness could create attachment. And attachment could create heartbreak. Neither of them needed that. Or so she thought. The first weeks were awkward. Elena moved into the enormous Moretti estate, feeling more like a guest than a wife. Everything around her felt unreal. The endless hallways, the expensive artwork, the staff members who treated her with respect. None of it felt like her world. She expected Alessandro to be controlling, demanding, cruel. After all, powerful men always wanted something. That was what life had taught her. But something strange happened. He left her alone. Completely. No demands. No pressure. No expectations. He gave her space. And somehow, that confused her more than fear ever could. One evening, she confronted him. Why are you being so distant? Alessandro looked up from his papers. Would you prefer the opposite? No. Then what's the problem? She hesitated. You don't act like a husband. Something unreadable flashed across his face. You don't act like a wife. Neither spoke. And suddenly, to Elena's surprise, he smiled. Not the cold smile that intimidated enemies, but a real one. Brief, warm, human. And for the first time, she saw the man behind the legend. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And little by little, Elena discovered things no one else knew. Alessandro hated thunderstorms. He loved old classical music. He secretly read poetry late at night. And every Sunday morning, without fail, he visited an orphanage anonymously. No cameras, no publicity, no recognition. He simply helped. Because once, long ago, someone had helped him. Elena couldn't understand it. The ruthless man everyone feared had a heart no one was allowed to see. And somehow, he trusted her enough to reveal it. But trust worked both ways. One rainy evening, Alessandro found Elena crying quietly in the library. Photographs of her mother lay scattered across the table. He approached slowly. "What happened?" She wiped her tears. "It's nothing." His voice softened. "That's usually when people are hurting the most." Something inside her broke. Years of loneliness. Years of pain. Years of pretending she was strong. They all came rushing out. And for the first time in a very long time, Elena allowed herself to cry. Not alone, but in front of someone. She expected judgment. Instead, Alessandro sat beside her in silence. No advice. No questions. Just presence. And sometimes, presence is the purest form of love. That night, neither realized something important had changed. Because walls built over years don't collapse with noise. They collapse quietly, one small moment at a time. Months later, Elena's father recovered. Seeing him healthy again filled her heart with gratitude. But it also reminded her of something painful. The contract. Half the year had already passed. Soon, the marriage would end. And strangely, that thought no longer brought relief. It brought sadness, which terrified her. Because feelings weren't part of the agreement. And feelings had a way of destroying people. Especially people like her. People who loved deeply. People who gave their entire hearts. She couldn't afford another loss. So she created distance. She avoided long conversations. Stopped joining Alessandro for dinner. Ignored his quiet attempts to spend time together. And though she thought she was protecting herself, she was slowly breaking someone else's heart. Because Alessandro Moretti had already fallen hopelessly in love. It happened without him realizing. Somewhere between their midnight conversations. Her laughter. The way she worried about everyone around her. The way she made his house feel like a home. The way she spoke to him without fear. The way she saw him. Not the monster. Not the powerful boss. Just Alessandro. And for a man who had spent his entire life being feared, being understood was more precious than being loved. Unfortunately, love had made him vulnerable. And vulnerability always attracted enemies. Because someone was watching. Someone dangerous. Someone from Alessandro's past. A man who hated him. A man willing to destroy everything he loved. And when that enemy discovered Elena, she became the perfect target. But what happened next would reveal a secret Alessandro had hidden for years. A secret that would shatter Elena's trust and leave her questioning whether the man she was beginning to love had been lying from the very beginning. And when she finally learned the truth, walking away seemed like the only choice. But fate still had one final chapter waiting for them. Love has a strange way of arriving quietly, and loss has a cruel way of arriving without warning. By the 7th month of their marriage, Elena no longer recognized the woman she had been before. The lonely girl who once believed she had to carry the world on her shoulders had changed. There was laughter in her life again, peace, hope, and although she refused to say it out loud, her heart had begun to belong to the man she once feared. But fate rarely allows happiness to come without testing it. And Alessandro Moretti had enemies, powerful enemies, men who had spent years waiting for an opportunity to hurt him. And when they discovered the identity of the woman who had somehow become the center of his world, they found the perfect weapon. One afternoon, Elena received an anonymous package. Inside were photographs, old photographs, pictures of her father, pictures of hospital records, pictures of herself. And one photograph stopped her breathing. It showed Alessandro standing beside the doctor who had treated her father. Attached to the picture was a note. "He chose you long before you ever chose him." Fear gripped her chest. Her hands trembled. Questions flooded her mind. Had everything been planned? Had their meeting been arranged from the beginning? Had her desperation simply been used? That evening, she confronted Alessandro. His expression changed the moment he saw the photographs. For the first time since she had met him, fear appeared in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear of losing her. "Tell the truth," Elena whispered. And after several painful seconds, he did. Years earlier, Alessandro had promised a dying friend that he would watch over his family. That friend had been Elena's mother. Neither Elena nor her father had known. After her mother's death, Alessandro quietly kept his promise from a distance, helping anonymously, protecting without revealing himself, until her father's illness brought them together. But one truth shattered Elena completely. He had known who she was before she entered his office. He had recognized her immediately, and he had offered marriage because he couldn't bear watching her suffer. Tears filled her eyes. "You already knew me." "Yes. You should have told me. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" His voice cracked. "Afraid you would hate me." Silence filled the room, and suddenly, the foundation of everything they had built seemed to crumble. Because trust, once broken, can feel impossible to repair. That night, Elena packed her belongings. Not because she hated him, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. And love without trust frightened her. As she walked away from the mansion, neither realized they were walking toward the darkest chapter of their lives. Because Alessandro's enemies had been waiting. And now, Elena was alone. 3 days later, she disappeared. No calls, no messages, no trace. At first, Alessandro thought she simply needed space. Until her abandoned car was discovered. His blood turned cold. For the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss looked completely broken. Because wealth meant nothing. Power meant nothing. Without Elena, nothing mattered. For 72 endless hours, he searched. The city trembled. People whispered. Because Alessandro Moretti wasn't acting like a king. He was acting like a man losing the love of his life. And when he finally discovered where she was being held, hell itself couldn't have stopped him. Elena had never been so afraid. Locked inside an abandoned warehouse, she understood something terrifying. The world she had married into was far darker than she had imagined. And yet, amid the fear, only one thought occupied her mind. Alessandro. Not because she needed his power, not because she needed his wealth, but because somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with him. And suddenly, the possibility of never seeing him again hurt more than death itself. Then the warehouse doors burst open. Chaos erupted. And through the darkness, she saw him, covered in blood, breathing heavily, desperate, not powerful, not feared, just desperate. His eyes found hers. And in that moment, relief flooded his face. As though his entire world had been returned to him, he rushed toward her, ignoring the danger, ignoring everything. And when he finally held her in his arms, the strongest man she had ever known began to cry. Not silently, not with dignity, but completely, because love had stripped away every wall he had built. And Elena realized something extraordinary. The man feared by everyone else, loved with his entire soul. Months later, life became quieter. Alessandro stepped away from many parts of the empire he had built, not because he had become weak, but because Elena had shown him that peace was worth more than power. And Elena herself had changed. The girl who once believed she was alone no longer carried every burden by herself. She had learned that strength wasn't found in suffering alone. Strength could also be found in allowing someone to stand beside her. Together, not apart. And then, the day arrived. Exactly 1 year after their marriage. The contract expired. The temporary marriage had officially ended. The divorce papers sat on the table, untouched. Neither spoke, neither moved. Finally, Elena smiled softly. "I guess this is goodbye." But Alessandro remained silent. His eyes glistened. Then, for the first time since they met, the powerful man who had always hidden behind control looked terrified. Not of enemies, not of danger, but of losing her. He reached into his pocket, and instead of divorce papers, he placed a small velvet box on the table. Elena froze. His voice trembled. "I know our first marriage wasn't real." Tears filled her eyes. "I know it wasn't your dream." His hands shook. "But every day with you became mine." He opened the box. Inside was a new ring. Not a business arrangement. Not a contract. Not an obligation. A promise. And with tears threatening to fall, Alessandro Moretti knelt before the woman who had changed his life. Not as a mafia boss. Not as a powerful man. But simply as a man hopelessly in love. "Elena Carter." His voice broke. "Will you marry me again?" "Not for a year. Not because you owe me anything. But because I love you. And because if there is another lifetime after this one, I'll spend that one loving you too." Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks. Memories flooded her mind. The hospital. The fear. The loneliness. The contract. The misunderstandings. The pain. and the countless moments that had slowly transformed strangers into soulmates. Then she laughed through her tears, the kind of laugh that only comes when happiness finally outweighs sorrow. And she answered with the word his heart had waited an entire year to hear. Yes, their second wedding was everything the first had never been. There were flowers, music, friends. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. And when Alessandro looked at his bride, there was no fear, no darkness, only gratitude. Because somehow, life had given a lonely girl the love she thought existed only in dreams. And it had given a broken man something he had never believed he deserved: a family. Years later, visitors would often stop at a cozy little bookstore cafe on a quiet street, a place filled with books, music, and the aroma of fresh coffee. A dream that had once seemed impossible. Behind the counter, Elena's smile would light up the room. And somewhere nearby, a certain man would always be watching her with the same hopeless devotion that had never faded. People who saw them together often wondered which one had saved the other. But perhaps the truth was simpler than that. Neither had saved the other. They had healed each other. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin with passion. They begin with pain. They begin with broken dreams. And they begin with two people who never expected forever, only to discover that forever had been waiting for them all along. And the woman who once believed their marriage was temporary eventually realized something beautiful. The contract had only lasted 1 year, but his love had no ending.